Hello, my little stars. I am back with chapter 5 of the BFG. I know that Miss Demers read to you yesterday, chapter 4. I actually listened to her chapter because I didn't read it myself. Her cat made it very entertaining. Let's just say that. A couple reminders before we start. First things first, if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. That way you'll get notifications when we post. Also, Google Classroom assignments have been posted. I posted the BFG chapters 1, 2, and 3. It was like I did them all together, like I clumped them together, and I posted them on Google Classroom. There's 4 slides, but really 3 because the first one doesn't count. It's just telling you what chapters they are. I am going to post another one today for the BFG chapters 4 and 5. Today's slides, I think there are 5. But again, only 4 because the first one is just letting you know what chapters they are. This slide has a crossword puzzle. It took Miss Carp forever to make, so I hope you guys like it. And make sure you check that out after you listen to this chapter. Last thing, epic books. I've had a lot of parents reach out to me and a lot of kids reach out to me on Dojo and say that they have been trying to do epic books later in the day, using it as their 20 minutes a night. The thing with epic books is you can only access it during school hours. So you can go on between 8 and 2:30, but once 2:30 hits, you can't get on anymore. However, because of this whole coronavirus situation, they have opened it to everyone for the rest of the school year whenever they want. It's called remote access, which means you can access it from anywhere. However, I have to be the one to add you. So if you're watching this and you tried to go on Epic Books and you can't, all I need is a parent email and send that to me on Dojo or through Remind or any other way. You can get a hold of me. You can comment on here too, but I wouldn't suggest that. I would just do Reminder Dojo. And I will add you so that you have remote access so that you can use it whenever you want. Okay. Also, unlike Miss Demers, I don't have any pets or children to interrupt me. So all I can do is offer you guest people. And one of them is right here next to me. His name is Tony. He's going to join us for today. So chapter 5 is called or titled The BFG. The giant picked up the trembling Sophie with one hand and carried her across the cave and put her on the table. Now he really is going to eat me, Sophie thought. The giant sat down and stared hard at Sophie. He had truly enormous ears. Each one was as big as the wheel of a truck, and he seemed to be able to move them inwards and outwards from his head as he wished. "I is hungry," the giant boomed. He grinned, showing massive, square teeth. The teeth were very white and very square, and they sat in his mouth like huge slices of white bread. "Please don't eat me," Sophie stammered. The giant let out a bellow of laughter. "Just because I is a giant, you think I is a man-gobbling cannibal?" he shouted. "You is about right. Giants is all cannibal and murderful, and they does gobble up human beings. We is in giant country now. Giants is everywhere around. Out there, us has the famous bone-crunching giant. Bone-crunching giant crunches up 2 wopsy-whiffling human beings for supper every night. Noise is ear-bursting. Noise of crunching bones goes crackety-crack for miles around." "Ouch," Sophie said. "Bone-crunching giant only gobbles human beings from turkey," the giant said. "Every night, Bone Cruncher is galloping off to Turkey to gobble Turks." Sophie's sense of patriotism was suddenly so bruised by this remark that she became quite angry. "Why, Turks," she blurted out. "What's wrong with the English?" Bone-crunching giant says, "Turks is tasting oh ever so much juicier and more scrumdiddlyumptious." Bone Cruncher says, Turkish human beings has a glamourly flavor. He says Turks from Turkey is tasting of turkey. "I suppose they would," Sophie said. "Of course they would," the giant shouted. "Every human being is diddly and different. Some is scrumdiddlyumptious, and some is uckislush. Greeks is all full of ucky slush. No giant is eating Greeks, ever." "Why not?" Sophie asked. Greeks from Greece is all tasting greasy," the giant said. "Well, I imagine that's possible too," said Sophie. She was wondering with a bit of tremble what all this talking about eating people was leading up to. Whatever happened, she simply must play along with this peculiar giant and smile at his jokes. But were they jokes? Perhaps the great brute was just working up an appetite by talking about food. "As I'm saying," the giant went on, "all human beings is having different flavors. Human beings from Panama is tasting very strong of hats." "Why hats?" Sophie said. "You is not very clever," the giant said, moving his ears in and out. "I thought all human beings is full of brains, but your head is emptier than a bundogle. Oof, I butchered that word. Here's a quick picture before I continue. "Do you like vegetables?" Sophie asked, hoping to steer the conversation towards a slightly less dangerous kind of food. "You is trying to change the subject," the giant said sternly. "We is having an interesting babblement about the taste of the human bean. The human bean is not a vegetable." "Oh, but the bean is a vegetable," Sophie said. "Not the human bean," the giant said. "The human bean has 2 legs and a vegetable has no legs at all." Sophie didn't argue anymore. The last thing she wanted to do was to make the giant cross. "The human bean," the giant went on, "is coming in dillions of different flavors. For instance, human beans from Wales is tasting very whooshy of fish. There is something very fishy about Wales." "You mean whales?" Sophie said. "Wales is something quite different." "Wales is Wales," the giant said. "Don't gobble funk around with words. I will now give you another example. Human beings from Jersey has a most disgustable wally tickle on the tongue," the giant said. "Human beings from Jersey is tasting of cardigans." "You mean jerseys?" Sophie said. "You are once again gobble funking," the giant shouted. "Don't do it. This is a serious and snitching subject. May I continue?" "Please do," Sophie said. "Danes from Denmark is tasting ever so much of dogs," the giant went on. "Of course," Sophie said. "They taste of Great Danes." "Wrong!" cried the giant, slapping his thigh. "Danes from Denmark is tasting doggy because they are tasting of Labradors." "Then what do the people of Labrador taste of?" Sophie asked. "Danes!" the giant cried triumphantly. "Great Danes!" "Aren't you getting a bit mixed up?" Sophie asked. "I is a very mixed up giant," the giant said. But I does do my best. And I is not nearly as mixed up as the other giants. I know one who gallops all the way to Wellington for his supper. Wellington, Sophie said. Where is Wellington? Your head is full of squashed flies, the giant said. Wellington is in New Zealand. The human beings in Wellington has an especially scrum-diddly-umptious taste. So says the welly-eating giant. What do the people of Wellington taste of? Sophie asked. Boots, said the giant. Of course, Sophie said. I should have known. Sophie decided that this conversation had now gone on long enough. If she was going to be eaten, she'd rather get it over and done with right away than be kept hanging around any more. What sort of human beings do you eat? She asked him, trembling. Me, shouted the giant, his mighty voice making the glass jars rattle on their shelves. Me, gobbling up human beings. This I never. The others, yes. All the others is gobbling them up every night, but not me. I is a freaky giant. I is a nice and jumbly giant. I is the only nice and jumbly giant in giant country. I is the big friendly giant. I is the BFG. What is your name? My name is Sophie, Sophie said, hardly daring to believe the good news she had just heard. It's the end of chapter 5, my loves. Okay, reminder, Google Classroom. Head on over there for the assignment. Say goodbye to Tony. Miss Carp, out.